I first noticed it on a quiet Tuesday morning. I had gone out to my backyard, coffee in hand, ready to finally enjoy a few minutes of peace before the chaos of the day kicked in. That's when I saw it. My pool cover, the one I was very careful about keeping perfectly straight, was slightly askew, just a little, almost unnoticeable, but for someone like me, that was a red flag. At first, I laughed. Maybe the wind had shifted it overnight. But then I remembered it had been a calm night. No gusts, no storms, nothing. My backyard is usually the epitome of calm and order. And yet here it was, a subtle sign that someone or something had been messing with my pool. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe my imagination was running wild. Maybe it was one of the neighborhood kids trying to be funny. But deep down, I knew better. Something didn't sit right. A few days later, it happened again. Only this time, it was impossible to ignore. The water in the pool was slightly warmer than usual, and my pool noodles, yes, the ones I carefully arranged in a perfect Instagram-worthy formation, had been moved. And I don't mean a little shift. I mean, someone actually waded through them like a tiny obstacle course kind of moved. That's when the panic started, not because I thought someone had simply borrowed my pool, but because I knew exactly who in this neighborhood would even dare to do this. Karen. Karen. The self-appointed queen of the HOA, the woman whose obsession with rules and appearances was matched only by her love of other people's property, if it suited her, of course. Her perfectly manicured nails, her glare that could cut glass, and her ability to turn a casual comment into a full-blown community complaint made her legendary in our little cul-de-sac. And somehow I had the misfortune of discovering she was also a sneak-in-your-backyard kind of person. I started noticing other things too, small clues, little signs that screamed, Karen was here. A misplaced towel, a float that had shifted overnight, the faint scent of sunscreen, and no, this wasn't paranoia, this was evidence. A trail of subtle chaos leading straight to her. I needed proof. I couldn't just storm over to her house and accuse her. She would laugh, she would deny, and she would probably turn the whole HOA against me. No, this required planning, strategy, and maybe a little cunning. I had to catch her in the act. So naturally, I did what any sane person would do in my situation. I turned into a backyard detective. I bought motion sensor lights and a couple of hidden cameras off Amazon, all with glowing promises like catch intruders in the act. I installed them in strategic spots, near the pool, behind the bushes, even pointing subtly at my float rack. I won't lie, walking around at night, hiding behind hedges with night vision goggles and whispering to myself like I was on some top-secret stakeout made me feel slightly insane. I looked ridiculous. I even imagined my neighbors peeking through their curtains, shaking their heads, muttering, "There goes that guy again." But desperation has a way of overriding dignity. Every evening I would sit by my window with my laptop, reviewing the footage, scanning for movement, replaying anything that could be a clue, and then one night there it was, a blur of motion, a shadow gliding across the pool. My stomach dropped. My heart started pounding like a... I paused the footage, I zoomed in, hair, tall silhouette, that unmistakable posture. Yes, it was Karen. She had been sneaking into my backyard, using my pool as if it belonged to her, sipping drinks, floating on my carefully arranged pool floats, enjoying herself like the pool fairy of entitlement. I leaned back in my chair, trying to breathe, trying to process. Part of me was furious. Part of me wanted to knock on her door and demand an explanation, and part of me couldn't stop laughing at the sheer audacity of it all. Karen, my HOA nemesis, secretly swimming in my pool. That night I lay in bed plotting. I needed a plan, a clever, satisfying plan. I couldn't let this slide, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. Karen's little power plays were about to meet their match, and I was already imagining her surprise when the tables turned. Little did she know, her sneaky pool adventures were about to become legendary, but not in the way she would like. After that first undeniable glimpse of Karen in my pool, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope it wouldn't happen again. Oh no, this was serious. This was my backyard, my pool, my sanctuary, and Karen had decided to treat it like a personal retreat. And if there's one thing HOA life has taught me, it's that Karen thrives on boldness. She won't stop until she's pushed every boundary. So I made a decision. I needed proof. Not just a hunch, not just some blurry footage or footprints. I needed undeniable, irrefutable evidence. Something that would leave her with no choice but to face the music, or at least face the judgment of the entire neighborhood. I turned my backyard into something that could only be described as a high-tech, slightly ridiculous surveillance operation. Motion sensor lights that flashed like mini spotlights, cameras tucked in flower pots, another hidden near the pool ladder because apparently Karen had no shame in just climbing right in. And yes, I even splurged on night vision goggles. Not that I knew how to use them properly. I spent the first 15 minutes peering at my own reflection and wondering if I looked like a secret agent or a HOA stalker. But I didn't care, I had a mission. Every night I stationed myself behind the bushes, laptop ready, heart hammering. My neighbors probably thought I'd lost it. If anyone asked, I would have claimed I was testing the lighting for a garden project. Truthfully, my life had turned into a bizarre mix of espionage and suburban drama, and I was loving every stressful second. And then it happened again. A few nights later, the motion sensor light flickered on. My pulse spiked. I squinted through the night vision goggles, adjusting them until I could make out a tall silhouette moving toward the pool. My stomach did flips. That unmistakable sway, that confident stride, the hair bouncing slightly, there was no doubt in my mind. It was Karen. She tiptoed like she thought she was being sneaky, though the way she held her little drink in one hand and a towel over her shoulder screamed overconfidence. She didn't notice the camera tucked behind the bush, nor did she see the small blinking red light by the poolside float. She didn't even glance toward the motion sensor lights that I had strategically placed to catch her in the act. I couldn't help but grin, finally, proof, hard, undeniable proofs. I whispered to myself, "This is it, Karen, your pool reign ends tonight." Of course, I had to play it cool. I didn't want her to suspect anything. That would ruin the plan. So I quietly adjusted the camera angles, checked battery levels, and made sure everything was recording properly. My life had become a careful balancing act of surveillance, stealth, and occasional bursts of laughter at the absurdity of it all. And then I noticed something that made my jaw drop. Karen wasn't just splashing around. No, she had somehow managed to bring a small speaker and was playing music, her music, like she was hosting a full-on pool party for one. I muted the speaker in my imagination and almost laughed out loud. Who does that? My neighbor, apparently. I watched as she sprawled across one of my floats, completely unaware of the camera's gaze. I could see her checking her phone, probably scrolling through HOA group chats like nothing was wrong. My mind raced. How could someone be this audacious? How could Karen have the nerve to waltz into someone else's backyard and relax like it was her personal resort? That's when I realized I needed more than video. I needed timestamps, angles, and maybe even some commentary, something that would make her actions undeniable to anyone watching. I jotted down a plan, bait for the next visit, strategically placed cameras for better angles, maybe even a small, perfectly positioned float to force her into a specific spot. I spent the next few days obsessively planning, packing, and checking every detail. Every night I reviewed the footage, slowing it down, pausing, zooming in. Each frame of Karen lounging in my pool felt like a tiny victory, and yet also a warning. This was going to escalate. And deep down I knew it. Karen was clever, self-righteous, and stubborn. She wouldn't stop just because I had a camera or two. She would push until I forced her hand. But that was exactly what I wanted. Because soon, very soon, her arrogance would be her undoing, and I would be ready to make it public in a way she would never forget. As I turned off the laptop that night, I felt a mix of excitement and nervous energy. This was no longer just about catching Karen. It was about preparing for the perfect moment, a moment that would expose her in full for everyone to see, and I couldn't wait. After nights of reviewing footage and watching Karen float around my pool like she owned the place, I realized something very important. This wasn't going to stop on its own. Karen wasn't a person who knew boundaries. She was the kind of neighbor who filed complaints about a slightly crooked mailbox but had no problem trespassing into my backyard for her personal relaxation. I needed a plan, not just any plan, something subtle, clever, and most importantly, satisfying. I wanted Karen to realize that the backyard she thought she could casually invade belonged to me, and not just me, I wanted the neighborhood to witness her antics. Karma had to be spectacular. I started brainstorming. At first, my ideas were questionable. Glitter bombs in the pool, dye that turned the water green, maybe even a strategically placed whoopee cushion on a float. I laughed at myself, packing back and forth, realizing I had turned into a full-blown HOA vigilante. But the thought of Karen discovering she'd been outsmarted kept me motivated. Then it hit me, subtlety would work best. I needed bait, something irresistible, something that screamed, "Step in and you will be caught." A float carefully positioned near the pool's center, a towel perfectly draped on the edge, and perhaps a drink, not just any drink, but something that looked casual, inviting, and totally in place for someone to pretend the backyard was theirs. I spent hours arranging and rearranging every detail. I moved the float a fraction of an inch, adjusted the angle of the drink so it caught the light just right, and made sure my cameras had the perfect line of sight. I was meticulous. If Karen walked into my backyard again, she wouldn't just be caught, she'd be trapped, unknowingly starring in her own public embarrassment. Of course, I had to consider the risks. What if she saw the cameras? What if she didn't take the bait? My heart pounded as I imagined a million scenarios. Karen noticing my presence, me tripping over a garden hose, the HOA gossip mill exploding before I even had a chance to act. But I reminded myself patience was key. Karen thrived on entitlement and impatience. She would come back eventually, and when she did, she'd fall right into the trap I had so carefully constructed. I also had to factor in timing. Karen usually made her moves late at night when she thought the world was asleep. So I set my surveillance system to capture every angle, motion sensor, lights ready, cameras recording, and my phone within reach. I even set up a secondary camera in the far corner just to catch the reaction, because let's be honest, the best part of this was imagining her face when she realized she had been caught. I spent the next few days in what can only be described as obsessive planning. I watched HOA meetings online, noted her habits, even checked which nights she seemed most likely to sneak out. Every detail mattered. Every nuance of her personality, every predictable move would be my advantage. And the more I planned, the more the humor of it all sank in. Here I was, a seemingly normal homeowner, conducting a full-scale surveillance and trap operation against a neighbor. I imagined myself narrating it later with dramatic pauses to friends who would laugh, incredulous at the lengths I had gone. But in the moment, it wasn't funny. It was serious. This was my backyard, my peace, and my sanity at stake. By the end of that week, the trap was ready. The float was in place, the drink on the edge, the cameras angled perfectly. I even rehearsed my own reactions, imagining what I would say if she confronted me mid-act. And then I waited. Patience is harder than it sounds. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump, every shadow passing my window sent my pulse racing, but I didn't move, I didn't give her any clue, because when Karen came back and she would come back, she wouldn't just be caught, she would be exposed, in full, undeniable glory. And in that moment, as I settled behind the bushes with my laptop and night vision goggles, I couldn't help but smile. Karen's little pool adventures were about to meet their match, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was in control. The night had finally arrived. The trap was ready. I double-checked everything, cameras, motion sensors, angles, and made sure my little float with the drink looked perfectly inviting. It was practically a neon sign screaming, "Step here, Karen. Go ahead, you know you want to." I felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. This was it. The moment when all my careful planning, surveillance, and obsessive strategizing would either pay off or blow up in my face. I positioned myself behind a large bush, laptop in hand, ready to capture every detail. The neighbors probably thought I was out there, whispering to myself and glaring at the moon like a lunatic, but I didn't care. This was serious business. Hours passed. I sat completely still, barely daring to breathe. Every tiny sound made me jump. A car passing, a dog barking, the rustle of leaves in the wind, each one set my pulse racing. And then in the distance, I saw it, the faint outline of someone approaching my backyard. My heart skipped a beat. She moved cautiously at first, glancing left and right, as if she could sense that something was off. I almost laughed. Karen, sneaky as she thought she was, had no idea the cameras were already recording, capturing every step of her bold intrusion. She reached the pool, and then I saw it, her eyes locked on the float, the drink perfectly positioned, practically begging to be used. I could practically hear the little ding in her brain that said, "Yes, this is mine." Karen stepped onto the edge of the pool. I held my breath. She glanced around like she was checking for witnesses or maybe just enjoying the thrill of trespassing, and then she slipped onto the float. My palms were sweaty, my stomach doing flip-flops. This was it, my moment of justice. She settled in, letting out a satisfied sigh as if she had discovered some hidden paradise. I leaned closer to the laptop screen, zooming in on every movement, every expression. This was the audacity I had been waiting for. The sheer confidence of a woman using my pool like it was a private resort was astonishing. I couldn't help but imagine the scene from her perspective. Look at me, Karen was probably thinking, carefree, untouchable, perfect. And I thought, oh, you have no idea. I whispered to myself, almost laughing out loud, "You're about to be famous, Karen, just not the way you want." As she lounged, flipping her hair and scrolling on her phone, I reviewed my camera angles one last time. The lighting was perfect, the float was in full view, and the small blinking red camera indicator ensured that no part of her little pool party went unrecorded. And then the best part, she brought out a small speaker and started playing music. I froze, realizing that Karen wasn't just relaxing, she was trying to make the scene theatrical. Every note of her tiny playlist floated across the water. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. Who does this? Seriously, who sneaks into someone else's backyard and turns it into their own personal spa party with music and a drink? Only Karen. I stayed completely still, my own little hidden spectator in this absurd theater of HOA drama. Every second felt stretched out, each splash of water a drumbeat of suspense. The tension was incredible. I could almost feel the neighborhood gossip forming in real time, like invisible whispers drifting through the hedges and fences. Hours felt like minutes. I stayed behind the bush, barely moving, until finally, Karen seemed completely absorbed in her little paradise. This was the perfect moment. She was relaxed, oblivious, and completely unaware of the cameras capturing her every move. I thought about the next steps, how I would turn this footage into undeniable proof, how I would expose her not with confrontation but with evidence. The satisfaction was almost palpable and I could barely contain my excitement. Karen had walked right into her own trap, and now it was only a matter of time before the whole neighborhood saw what I had been seeing all along. Finally, I allowed myself a small smile, knowing that this night would mark the beginning of the end of Karen's backyard reign. She had been bold, reckless, and arrogant, and she had no idea that every move she was making was being carefully documented. Patience and preparation had brought me here, and soon Karen's little secret would no longer be hers alone. The night had finally come. After days of preparation, obsessive planning, and borderline paranoia, I was ready. My backyard was set up like a high-stakes theater, and Karen, blissfully unaware, was about to take center stage. I settled behind the bush, laptop in hand, night vision goggles perched awkwardly on my forehead. Every creak of a branch made my heart jump, every distant car passing by sounded like a siren of doom. And yet I couldn't stop smiling. This was it, my moment of sweet HOA justice. I kept my eyes glued to the monitor, and then from the darkness she appeared. Karen, slow, careful steps, yet carrying herself like a queen making an entrance. She glanced around, perhaps sensing something, but not enough to deter her. She had come knowing my backyard was her temporary playground and nothing would stop her. I held my breath as she approached the pool. The float with the drink was exactly where I had positioned it, perfectly tempting. She paused for just a moment, surveying the scene, and then climbed in. Her expression relaxed instantly, that smug look of someone who thinks they're untouchable. I couldn't help but chuckle quietly. "Oh, Karen, you really think you're invisible, don't you?" The suspense was almost unbearable. Every second stretched out, the tension building like a tightrope I was daring her to cross. And she did, step by step, splash by splash, moving right into my trap. I leaned closer, fingers trembling slightly over the mouse, ready to zoom in on every tiny detail. She sprawled across the float, drink in hand, completely unaware that the camera had captured her every move. I could see her flipping her hair, adjusting the towel beneath her, scrolling on her phone, and humming along to the music she'd brought. She looked so confident, so unbothered, so arrogant, perfect. My palms were sweating, my stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. I kept reminding myself this wasn't just about catching her, this was about sending a message, a lesson, a little chaos wrapped in poetic HOA justice. And then the perfect opportunity appeared. Karen leaned too far back, stretching for the edge of the pool. The camera captured every second, her balance teetering, the drink wobbling, the float shifting. I could practically hear the slow-motion soundtrack playing in my head. She caught herself just in time, but the damage was done. Her obliviousness was recorded forever. Every laugh, every careless gesture, every smug glance toward the backyard I owned, immortalized in high-definition proof. I couldn't resist. I quietly opened the neighborhood social media group and started typing a message, careful not to send it yet. Comments would explode once people saw what I had. Once they realized the infamous Karen, queen of HOA perfection, had been secretly wadding in my pool without permission. Minutes passed, I stayed completely still, barely breathing as she finally seemed to relax again. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. The suspense was electric. I could feel the story unfolding, a narrative of arrogance meeting preparation, privilege meeting patience, entitlement meeting consequence. I imagined the reaction of my neighbors, their shock, their amusement, their judgment, and then the moment I'd been waiting for. Karen looked directly at the camera, or maybe she didn't, maybe she just sensed something. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. That split second was gold. I clicked live before I could second-guess myself. The feed went public. Comments started pouring in almost immediately. "Is that Karen? OMG, she's in your pool? This is unbelievable." I watched her face. Confusion, panic, and disbelief all rolled into one expression. The smug, untouchable Karen had vanished. She tried to cover the drink, tried to wave it off, but it was too late. The entire neighborhood could see exactly what she was doing, exactly how audacious she had been. I leaned back, letting a small, triumphant smile spread across my face. This was it. The culmination of days of planning, of careful observation, of patience. Karen had stepped into her own trap, and the whole neighborhood had a front-row seat. And in that moment, I realized something wonderful. There's nothing quite like seeing a neighbor's confidence collapse in real time, knowing you engineered every second of it. The night was mine, my backyard was mine. And Karen, well, she was about to learn that sometimes, even HOA royalty has to play by the rules. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived. Karen, floating in my pool with a smug grin and her tiny speaker blaring, was about to become famous, but not for the reasons she would have liked. I had gone live on the neighborhood social media group, and the comments started flooding in almost immediately. "Oh my gosh, is that Karen?" one neighbor typed. "She's in your pool, no way," another exclaimed. I could barely stop myself from laughing. The live feed captured everything: the careful placement of the float, the wobbling drink, and Karen's oblivious gestures as if the entire world didn't exist outside her little pool paradise. And then I watched her realization hit. First, a small flicker of confusion crossed her face. Then panic. She looked around, eyes darting toward the camera, toward the bushes, toward the edge of the pool, like she had suddenly noticed the invisible audience of neighbors who were now watching every move she made. And it was glorious. Karen tried to salvage the situation. She waved her hands as if motion could erase the embarrassment. She smiled awkwardly, laughed nervously, even tried to make a joke about community pools like she had an excuse ready for every occasion. But the comments kept coming and the neighbors were merciless. "She thought it was a community pool," someone wrote. "This is her backyard, right?" "Yes, I literally saw her sneaking in last week too," another chimed in. Her face turned a shade of red I didn't think was physically possible. The more she tried to justify herself, the worse it became. Every denial, every flustered explanation only added fuel to the fire. The camera didn't lie. My careful planning, my hidden cameras, and that perfectly placed float had captured the undeniable truth. Karen had been using my pool without permission, and she had no shame about it. I leaned back in my chair, trying not to guffaw too loudly. The tension, the suspense, the hours of waiting, it had all built to this one perfect moment. Karen was unraveling in front of an audience, and I had a front row seat. She tried to recover. I thought this was okay," she stammered. "It looked empty." Empty? My backyard had been empty, yes. Until now. Until me, the audacity, the sheer entitlement. I could barely contain my laughter as she scrambled, trying to gather her little towel, her drink, and even her dignity. Neighbors were chiming in live now, some shocked, some amused. One even posted a gif of a woman dramatically falling into a pool, perfectly capturing Karen's expression. It was like watching karma unfold in real time. I could feel the suspense building to its peak. Karen's panic escalated with each new comment, each realization that the entire neighborhood was witnessing what she had been trying to keep secret. Her usual confidence, her "I run the HOA and therefore everything is mine" attitude, was crumbling before my eyes. And then the best part, the HOA itself got involved. One neighbor who happened to be an HOA board member messaged me directly, "We need to talk now, this is remarkable." Remarkable, oh, it was remarkable. Karen's reputation, her self-righteous persona, her aura of untouchable perfection, all collapsing in the span of a few minutes, broadcasted live for everyone to see. I allowed myself a small, victorious grin. This was exactly what I had planned, exactly what I had envisioned when I first noticed those footprints in the night. Patience, planning, and a little creativity had turned the tables. Karen had walked right into the trap, and now she couldn't wriggle free. The suspense wasn't over yet, though. I knew Karen wouldn't just disappear quietly. She would try to respond, to spin her story, to salvage something from this public spectacle. But that was fine. I had all the evidence I needed. Every motion, every laugh, every careless splash had been recorded. The moment was mine. As I watched Karen finally climb out of the pool, drenched, flustered, and humiliated, I couldn't help but think, sometimes justice isn't about confrontation. Sometimes it's about preparation, patience, and letting someone's own arrogance do the work for you. And with that, I sat back, satisfied, knowing the next few days were going to be chaotic and glorious for Karen. The entire neighborhood had seen her secret, and there was no turning back. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of notifications. My phone was blowing up, buzzing with messages from neighbors, friends, and even a few people I barely knew. Karen's pool debacle had gone viral in our little neighborhood, and apparently the internet, or at least our HOA social group, never forgets. I scrolled through the messages, trying not to laugh too loudly, though it was hard. Some were sympathetic toward me, congratulating me on my cunning plan. Others were pure entertainment. Memes, gifs, and commentary about Karen's pool adventure spread like wildfire. One neighbor even joked, "I didn't know HOA drama could be this cinematic." And then there were the messages from the HOA itself. They weren't angry at me. No, they were much too smart for that. Instead, they were reviewing the footage, forwarding it to board members, and quietly preparing to address the situation. Karen, on the other hand, was scrambling. She started messaging everyone she knew, trying to explain herself. "I thought it was a community pool," she typed to one neighbor. "I didn't mean any harm," she told another. But the messages were desperate, panicked, and only made things worse. The more she tried to justify, the more obvious it became that she had been caught red-handed. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and amusement. Karen's carefully constructed reputation as the perfect, self-righteous HOA president was unraveling fast. People who used to nod politely to her at meetings were now whispering, smirking, and sharing screenshots of the pool fiasco. Karma had arrived, fashionably late but undeniably dramatic. By mid-morning, I noticed a few neighbors visiting my house, pretending to ask about unrelated things but clearly wanting to peek at the scene of the crime. I waved, trying to play casual while secretly enjoying the subtle chaos. Karen's own actions had become a neighborhood spectacle. I was no longer just a homeowner defending my pool. I was an unintentional producer of one of the most entertaining HOA moments of the year. Karen eventually tried to confront me directly. She appeared at my door, soaked from the pool, flustered and red-faced. I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she stammered, clutching her little towel like a shield. I smiled politely, letting her hang herself in her own words. "You mean by using my pool without permission?" I asked lightly. She hesitated, scrambling for an excuse. I thought, well, it looked empty, and I just wanted a quick dip. I shook my head, suppressing a laugh. "Karen, it's my backyard, not a community pool, not your private spa, my backyard." Her face fell. For the first time, I saw real vulnerability behind the self-righteous mask she always wore at HOA meetings. She realized that the power she usually wielded through fear, rules, and gossip had no weight here. The neighborhood had seen the truth, and there was no spin that could undo it. The gossip didn't stop. Neighbors discussed it endlessly at barbecues, casual walks, and in passing at the mailbox. Karen's attempts at damage control only fueled the story. One even commented, "I always knew Karen liked pools, but I didn't think she'd treat someone else's like her own personal resort." The humor was relentless, and I couldn't help but smile at every sarcastic quip. Even the HOA board was quietly weighing in, sending notes about trespassing and pool safety. Karen realized that this wasn't just embarrassing, it could have financial consequences. Fines, warnings, and possibly restrictions loomed over her like storm clouds. Meanwhile, I finally felt the relief I had been craving. My backyard was mine again, my pool safe from unauthorized floats and random margaritas. The suspense, the planning, the waiting, it had all paid off. And Karen? Well, she had learned the hard way that entitlement has limits. I spent the evening floating in my pool, popcorn in hand, watching the sunset and imagining future HOA meetings where Karen would have to face not just me, but the entire neighborhood armed with their collective knowledge of her sneaky pool escapades. The satisfaction was absolute. Sometimes I thought justice isn't about confrontation or anger, it's about patience, clever planning, and letting someone's own arrogance do the work for you. And in this case, the neighborhood had front-row seats to the most spectacular lesson Karen had ever received. After the chaos of the past few days, a rare sense of calm finally returned to my backyard. The pool was quiet, the floats perfectly in place, and the water sparkling like nothing had ever happened. I sank into my favorite lounge chair, popcorn in hand, and let out a deep sigh. It had been a long, tense journey, watching Karen sneak into my pool, carefully planning my trap, and then broadcasting her little escapade to the entire neighborhood. The adrenaline had worn off, but the satisfaction lingered. There's a particular kind of joy that comes from seeing someone's arrogance collide spectacularly with reality, and Karen's collision had been nothing short of glorious. The neighborhood was still buzzing, of course. People stopped by to compliment my clever setup, laugh about the videos, and even share their own Karen stories from past HOA meetings. Every comment, every chuckle felt like a small victory, a reminder that justice could be delivered without raising a single voice or filing a single complaint. As for Karen, well, she had retreated into the shadows. No more impromptu backyard visits, no more community pool claims, no more smug glances at HOA meetings. The humiliation had done its work. Her usual confidence was replaced with caution, and I could tell she was thinking twice before attempting any future mischief. I even put up a small, discreet sign near the pool edge. "Private pool, trespassers will be filmed." No dramatics, no shouting, just a simple reminder that boundaries exist. It wasn't meant to embarrass anyone further. Well, maybe just a little. That evening I floated on my raft, popcorn balanced carefully on the side, watching the sun dip below the trees. I reflected on everything that had happened, the suspense, the planning, the patience it had taken to orchestrate the perfect trap. I realized that it wasn't just about catching Karen. It was about reclaiming my space, my peace, and my sense of control in a neighborhood where entitlement sometimes ran rampant. And the humor of it all wasn't lost on me. Who spends hours hiding in bushes, night vision goggles on, plotting against a neighbor? Apparently me, but it worked. Every tense moment, every late-night stakeout, every frantic adjustment to the camera angles had led to this quiet, victorious peace. I even caught myself imagining future conversations. At the next HOA meeting, Karen would sit there, carefully measuring her words, aware that the entire room knew what she had done. I smiled, knowing that no speech, no rule, no polished smile could undo what had already been exposed. For my part, life returned to normal, or as normal as life can be when your backyard has hosted the most legendary HOA drama of the year. I still checked the cameras occasionally, out of habit more than anything else, but I didn't need to. The peace was real, and the message had been delivered loud and clear. My backyard was mine, my pool was mine, and Karen's little adventures were over. As I floated under the evening sky, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. Justice, patience, and a little creativity had turned what could have been a stressful situation into something almost cinematic, a story I knew neighbors would be talking about for months, if not years. And yes, I had learned something too. Sometimes the best way to deal with someone like Karen isn't confrontation, isn't anger, and certainly isn't giving in. Sometimes it's about planning, patience, and letting the universe, or your own careful strategy, do the work for you. Finally, I kicked back, popcorn in hand, and let the quiet wash over me. The pool shimmered, the float rocked gently with the evening breeze, and for the first time in days, the backyard felt completely, undeniably mine. Karen had been exposed, the neighborhood had watched, and life had returned to its natural rhythm. And as I drifted lazily in the water, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes victory is quiet, subtle, and perfectly satisfying, and sometimes it comes in the form of a float, a camera, and a little bit of clever planning. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.